everyone for joining us this evening for our presentation that is going to cover our programs in PVSchools, special education. Thank you to Andrea, our VP of Membership for UPC, for joining us and helping us with the technical aspect. Thank you to Ms. Linda Taylor, who's going to be our presenter this evening. Thank you. Would you like to take it away?
And
thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Jessica Crane, for getting this going tonight. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I know most of you are virtual, and thank you also for being here virtually. Thank you to those of you in the room. I'm Linda Taylor. I'm the Director of Special Education, and I'll be your presenter this evening. Some other people that are referenced up here, Dr. Danielle Eltz. She is our new Director of Student Services. Student Services oversees 504s, and that's part of our presentation tonight. Special Education oversees things that fall under IDEA, and that's myself and Gianna Cola, our Assistant Director of Special Education. In the back of the room, in case we have any Spanish speakers, we have Diana Torres, who is our Spanish interpreter and translator. So if anyone needs Diana's assistance, she's over here in the corner. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're just going to have an overview of 504 kinds of special education programs. Okay, so we have to do a confidentiality disclaimer. Sometimes when we've got a room with people, with students that have special needs, parents want to ask something very specific about their child. I'm going to ask you to please refrain from doing that because we need to preserve your child's confidential information. So if you have specific, I'm going to try that one more time, specific questions about your child's needs, please feel free to schedule a time to talk with me. And my business cards are over there on the table. Thank you. So Section 504. Section 504 is of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, and it has since been revised. We're just going to touch on that briefly, but it is an anti-discrimination law. It is more about an equal playing field. It's about leveling the playing field for students. Instead of giving them something different, we just make sure that they're able to access what other kids can access. Think of it as a box so that you can see what taller people can see. I personally need that myself. And it's also now an amendment with the 2008 Americans with Disabilities Act that actually expanded the definition of what 504 can cover. Oftentimes, and I'm going to really confuse you now, we didn't get very far into this, but you can have an IEP and a 504. We'll come back to that. So sometimes the two do cross. Okay, so what is a disability? To have a 504 or an IEP, you have to have a disability. So a disability is health issues such as respiratory problems that would interfere with normal everyday activities. Learning issues such as reading and concentrating. Any impairments that substantially limits a major life activity. And that's an important point, that substantially limits a major life activity. It may be harder for you to do some things, but if you're not limited, it's not really a disability. Specific learning disabilities. Autism, blindness, deafness, intellectual disability, orthopedic disability, speech, traumatic brain injury, and the list goes on and on. We learn about new things daily. So there are all kinds of things that are considered disabilities. And we're going to talk in a minute about, would you go the 504 route or would you pursue an IEP? A 504 plan ensures equal access for all students that have a disability. So the team at the school typically consists of the nurse, because if there's a health issue involved, we want that nurse to be involved. We want a medical professional in the room. There's typically a 504 coordinator at each site. It could be the administrators also involved, and then your child's teacher, and anybody that has relevant information. That would be a 504 team. They would meet to discuss the nature of the disability. So for instance, you've noticed that your child's having some issues, you take them to the pediatrician, and they say your child has ADHD. Now you have a disability. What do I do with this? You're going to take it to the school, and they're going to pull together the 504 team. They're going to talk to you about, is it impacting your child's access to the curriculum or any other parts of their education? Is it negatively impacted? So the learning experiences are not going to change. What happens with the 504 is it's a list of accommodations, things that we can do to the school setting to enable the child to access it. We're not going to change much. We're just going to change and make it an equal or a level playing field. And it's just how the child accesses it. We're not changing the experience. But some disabilities require more than just access. And now we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. When students have a specific learning disability that's really impacting their learning, their ability to learn to read, for instance, That's when we often catch the child who really needs something different. Blindness, deafness, autism, all of these, now they're gonna need more than just equal access. They're gonna need a different or a special education. And that's where we come in. So 504 versus special education. 504 is really an anti-discrimination law. Many adults have 504 plans in the workplace. If you need an elevator key because you have mobility issues, you have a 504 accessibility issue. And that is something that could qualify you for something different. Evaluation process in special education is much more formal. If you bring a doctor's note saying that your child has ADHD, that's all that's required for a 504 plan. But if you bring it to a special educator and say my child has ADHD, we're going to look at what do we need to do as far as instruction, as far as accommodations, all kinds of things. We're going to do a big assessment to look at what else might be in there. It's helping, that's keeping your child from learning. So the evaluation process is far more formal in special education. Access to education is a 504. Different, extra, or special education is when we start talking about IDEA. Special education plans are far more detailed, and they typically cover the anti-discrimination access needs of 504. So while I say 504 is a list of accommodations, for instance, I'm short, I need something tall to stand on to see over things. That would be an accommodation, and I got maybe a list of those. Maybe I need something by the sink so I can reach it. Those would be accommodations. But if I also have some learning that goes along with that, those accommodations are also going to go into my IEP or my learning plan. When you transition from an IEP, often a 504 is put in place. So sometimes we work the other way around. When we've had a student for a while who had a learning disability, and we've really worked hard to teach them strategies and to really play to their strengths, sometimes they no longer need an IEP, but they might still need those accommodations that we also put in place. That can then go to a 504, and it's a less restrictive transition. We transition away from an IEP and onto a 504. So it's kind of a fluid process sometimes. We wouldn't do this multiple times in a year. Throughout a child's educational career, this could occur. Okay, so determining eligibility. We typically have an initial evaluation when we suspect that a student has a disability. So now we're kind of past 504. 504 it wasn't enough. We've done the 504. Your child needs more. So we suspect there's a disability. So an initial evaluation is going to include, it's going to be a psychoeducational evaluation. We're going to look at your child's cognition or their overall global cognitive ability. We're going to look at their achievement. How are they, if this is what they have the capacity to learn, what are they actually learning? And we compare those two. Are there some impediments to it? We look at their vision, we look at their hearing. Are those things getting in the way of learning? We look at using assistive technology as a part of that, because we know that our students live on their devices now. So we use that to our advantage, and we use assistive technology as a part of our evaluation tool. We'll have a MET meeting. MET is a multidisciplinary evaluation team, and that's going to be all the people. Now you'll see some of the folks here who are helping us tonight. Their children were identified as having disabilities when they were in preschool or very, very young. And so their team consists of a lot of people. They might have an occupational therapist in the room who's looking at fine motor abilities. How do they grasp? How do they pick things up? We'll have gross motor or bigger movements that we'll look at. And that might be our physical therapist. We might have a speech and language person in the room if they're having a language delay. So the team can be quite large depending on what the disability is, or it can be quite small. It just depends. And the I in IEP, you'll hear me refer to a lot tonight. That is individualized. For every child, we individualize this plan because every child is an individual. We don't have a one size fits all for this. And then we're going to meet at the end after we do the full evaluation. That typically takes a couple of months. We do a thorough assessment. We do observations of the student in the classroom, in PE, in the cafeteria, in art, in music, in all areas of school. We make sure we look at the whole child. And then we meet as a team. Again, those people, that big team of people, will meet to review the results and determine eligibility. What did we find in all of this testing? And now what do we need to do as a team to make sure your child gets the best education they can get? The IEP process. When you go to your first IEP, and I assume that you guys have already been to an IEP since you're here, you're familiar with the process, you'll go over meeting norms. In our meetings here at the district office, we typically have meeting norms as well, just kind of some basic expectations. We set those so that people I understand that this can be a very emotional process, especially when you're hearing information that for the first time, or that's not information that you're comfortable with. Sometimes an eligibility is an uncomfortable conversation because sometimes it's hard to admit that like this is something that could be forever. So we ask that everybody kind of bring their best self to the table, and we do the same. It's also about taking turns speaking and listening respectfully, contributing meaningfully. That's a really important part for those of you that are parents that are listening. It's really important to be a meaningful contributor. You see a side of your child that we don't see. We see your child at school, but when you're at home with them, when you're out in the community with them, you see an entirely different child. And so it's really important that you are a member of that team, that you're a vocal member of that team, and that you share information about your child, how they learn for you, how they play for you, how they talk to you, how they interact with others, whether it's children, their cousins, strangers. That's important information. We're going to talk about present levels. That's their academic performance, but it's also their functional performance. Can they tie their own shoes? Can they feed themselves? Are they tidy? Can they organize their backpack? Like all of that is part of their present levels of functioning. Not just academics. Can they read, write, and count their stuff? Parent input again. I can't stress enough. It's very, very important that you give your inputs, and then the team will develop some measurable goals. Once we determine like this is an area that we're going to really focus on. Your child really struggles with phonemic awareness. They don't know the sounds of the letters. They don't know the sounds in the alphabet. So we're going to be very targeted in how we're going to teach that. We're going to look at really drilling down into those skills. And that's, of course, a very basic example. But when a child is young, that's often something that we would focus a measurable goal around. How are we going to teach a child to pair a letter with a sound? And then how are we going to blend those together? Because we all know that's what we do when we read. So measurable goals will be very, very specific. And we'll start with a baseline. This is where your child is now, but we want to get them here. So here's how we're going to do it. And that's the roadmap. Your goals are the roadmap. And then we'll determine the services to be provided. Do they just need academic goals, or do they need some occupational therapy? If they can't hold their pencil to write those letters, maybe they need some occupational therapy as well. If they really need maybe some dynamic seating. Your child has ADHD. We've talked about that. They're squirming in their seat and they can't do their work. So we're going to maybe look at some dynamic seating so they can get that energy out in a different way. We have desks where kids can stand. So we can get pretty creative. And if you walk through today's schools, it's certainly not the schools of old. We've got all kinds of setups for kids because we know kids have different needs. So those will all go into the services to be provided, and then accommodations and modifications. Accommodations takes us back to that. Remember, we were talking about 504s. Those are accommodations. So we're going to talk about what can we do to accommodate your child. Do they need a little bit more time on the test? That's fine. They're still doing the same test, right? We're testing them on the same thing, but we're going to give them a little bit more time if they need to work at a little bit slower pace. That's an accommodation. But now we're going to maybe look at, they might need a different test that measures it in a different way. That would be a modification. We're going to change how we're asking for the information. Maybe your child needs to tell us out loud, and maybe we need to come at it in a different format. Maybe 3 choices where the kids over here are doing a narrative. So that would be a modification. We're going to change the expectation. So all of that could be encompassed in the IEP process. And I know this is a ton of information. This is recorded, so you can go back and see it again and again. And my business card is here. So for those of you and those of you online, please don't think I'm neglecting you. You can find me on the website too, and feel free to reach out if you have questions after this presentation. I should be careful when I say that, right? Because tomorrow my line will be gone. So moving along, procedural safeguards. Those are your rights as parents. They don't change often. We receive them from the Arizona Department of Education, but you'll get this little booklet the first time, and then every time after that we meet with you, we offer you your parents' rights or your procedural safeguards. And those are rights of parents and of your child under the umbrella of IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That governs special education. So your procedural safeguards are covered in that, and it's offered to you every time. And it's really important that you at least read the summary. The first page, I think, is a summary, and it also gives some good resources for families. It's got raising special kids on there and things like that, which sometimes it is challenging navigating this process. I've done this for so many years that for me, I can do this presentation in my sleep. But for those of you that are new, welcome, come on in. To those of you that are new to this, you know, it can be challenging. Raising special kids is a free parent advocacy tool that they'll come in, I'm sorry, not tool, but a group that will come in and help you with just navigating the process and understanding all of the jargon that we use in special education, because we talk to each other about it all the time. We think everybody knows these acronyms and the alphabet soup that we throw around. So they can help you to navigate that. And the prior written notice is a document that you'll get after the meeting, but prior to services taking place. So it's a summary of everything that gets discussed in your meeting, things that were proposed, things that we agree that we're going to do, things that maybe were brought up, but we're really not going to do because it's not going to be in the child's best interest. And then kind of, you know, encapsulating what we've done, and then you'll receive that. And then a couple of days, it'll give you time to kind of digest, what did we just hear? And then a few days later, services will begin. And we'll indicate on there the date that services begin. So it's all pretty clearly delineated, but it's a lot of information to digest at once. So a continuum of services. Here in Paradise Valley, we have the luxury at this time to still have a continuum of services. We have resource support, which is typically a resource teacher who would go into the class. Well, actually, we have two different models. We have an inclusive model and a pull-out model. At some sites, and this is pretty site-based, in Paradise Valley, we do have some site-based autonomy still. And so sites are allowed to determine what do we think is best for the student population we serve. And so in some cases, teachers will push in and they will work with students in their general education setting on those special goals that they have. Sometimes they will pull them out because what they need to do is a little different and maybe a little bit more rigorous and intense, and it cannot be done in the classroom without disruption. And so we have both models, and sometimes a student may have both of those services in a day. Maybe they can be pushed in for reading because they just need a little bit of help, but they might have to be pulled out for math because they're doing something different. So you might see a combination of those, but we have kind of a variety of services here in Paradise Valley. And self-contained programs, which we call our specialized programs. We have a lot of them here in PV. We'll start with communication development. That is for kiddos whose language, their language impairment really affects their ability to access the curriculum. It's not a funny sounding R, so it sounds like a W. It's not that kind of a thing. It's where language, their grasp of language keeps them from learning. And so we have a program, and it's an early childhood program. It's K3. It's an early program. We want to hit it as early intervention because we don't want them to be in that kind of a program forever. We want them to be out with rich language models as well. So it's a K3 program at a couple of sites in our district. And when a student is tracked into a CD program, the curriculum is a little bit different there. It's very tailored around a language immersion, but it's the English language. When I say language immersion, everything Spanish or Mandarin, it's the English language, but they're really innovating everything with language. So those kids get a really rich, deep understanding of the language and hopefully make up the gaps that they've got. And then they go out to resource as they get older and move into the upper grades. Learning for Academic Success is a program that we have for students who have learning disabilities across the board. And there's not typically a big difference between their intellectual capacity and their achievement. So their intellectual capacity may be, kind of average, but they're achieving a little below average in all areas. We want to hit that and get that again, K3, so that those kids, by the time they get to fourth grade, they're reading, they're doing math, they're writing, so they can get back in with their peers and access, the general education curriculum. So that's typically also an early childhood program or an early intervention. Learning for Independence. Now, this is one where a child's eligibility is going to drive that placement. When a child has been identified as having an intellectual disability, and obviously those are different levels of disability, but when a child has an intellectual disability, we look at our Learning for Independence program. They are going to receive oftentimes a different curriculum because they have different academic needs. They have different social needs. When they're very little, they have different functional needs. We may be teaching those children to tie their shoes and to toilet independently. Some of our students have that level of need. We've got 3 levels in our district of Learning for Independence programs. We've got 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the highest, kids with mild intellectual disabilities, and then there's moderate and then more severe. So we kind of separate the students out so that we can really target them and learning from each other and learning from a special education teacher. So that's one of the programs that we still continue. And that's all the way from preschool through well, actually through transition. We'll talk about transition in a little bit, but we have students that finish their 12th year of school, and then from 18 to 22, we have them in a transition program. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but learning for independence is one of the areas that qualifies you to be in that program. Uniquely gifted, twice exceptional. I'm not even sure the letters should probably be smaller because it has such a tiny little presence in our district, but very few students are identified as uniquely gifted. Students who have a gifted IQ and also have an eligibility of special education, they qualify for both. We do have an early childhood program for those students. It goes up through 3rd grade. It's a K-3 program. But we have a lot of kids that do fit the profile, but families often choose not to put them in that small program and rather keep them in their gifted program on their campus and have some supports around them. So we do have a program for that, but it's very, very small. Structured autism. This is on the rise. We have a lot of students in our district with autism, and we have a couple of different levels of autism. We've got it, from our preschool all the way up through our transition programs. And we've got 2 different levels as far as abilities. We've got a level 1. We call our programs as structured programs because of how we run the classrooms. There's a lot of structure built in. There's a lot of visuals. Everything's kind of based on the schedule because the students typically respond well to that routine. So our structured autism program is one that is growing. We've got them at a lot of elementary schools, quite a few middle schools, quite a few high schools. But we've got the level 1 for kids who are academic oriented. Their entire day is spent with academics, but they have some social needs. They have some sensory needs. So we make sure that we meet those as well. And then for our students who have more functional goals, they have a level 2 class, and those students have a different type of a curriculum. They have a unique learning systems, and that kind of addresses their specific learning styles. It's a different curriculum for those students that have those unique needs. Connections. This is our program for students who have emotional disabilities. We have quite a few students that fall into these programs. We've got a couple of elementary sites, a middle school site, a high school site, and then we also have Roadrunner. Roadrunner is a self-contained school for students who have an emotional disability. And these are typically kids who have not been successful on comprehensive campuses. So they've been at their high school or the middle school or their elementary school that had the program, but it wasn't enough. We needed another level of support. So Roadrunner is our site for connections. And then we do have some students that are placed privately that were more than Roadrunner, they needed more than Roadrunner could support as well. So we do have some students privately placed for those needs. Post-secondary transition. This is what I was just talking about for our 18 to 22-year-olds. Pathways is what we call that program there. We used to call it transition, but that didn't sound like much fun. So we call it pathways because it's a pathway to adulthood. It's a pathway from living with your parents to possibly living independently. It's a pathway to potentially doing travel on your own, whether that's getting your driver's license or learning how to use Dial-A-Ride or other transportation modes safely. It's also a pathway to the employment world. And so we work on job skills, things of that nature. So we call it pathways because it just kind of describes a little bit more accurately what we do. We try to build a pathway for them to their future. Project Search is one of our transition programs that we have, a point of pride for our district. We have a partnership with Mayo Clinic, the big one that's in our boundaries. And each year they'll take 12 students. These students have to go through a rigorous interview process. And then if selected, they go through a pretty rigorous screening as well to be a part of it. But they go through 3 different rotations as unpaid internships. And they get all kinds of job skills. They have a mentor everywhere they go. They have a job coach from our department. One of our parents here tonight, Deb Kozak, has been instrumental in helping us get this launched and off the ground and making sure that our students have everything they need. And we have a tremendous, this is our 5th year of Project Search, and we have a tremendous success rate with this program. Last year, 100% of our students were employed at graduation. So that's exciting, exciting news. We're getting great results with this, great outcomes. One of the things that I felt very strongly about when I got to this position, I've been in this role now for 10 years as the director. I had people coming to me saying, Linda, we've got students who graduated. They've gone on and gotten jobs. They're doing really well. But when it comes time to try to go for a promotion, they can't get a promotion because they were given a certificate of completion. And in looking at their transcripts, these students had taken the same course path that every other student has to graduate high school in Arizona and get a diploma. But because they had a different level of a course, it was supported by a resource teacher. They had gotten a certificate of completion. And so I made it my mission, and now we have diplomas for students who complete the same coursework. I think that's fair, and it levels the playing field for our kids when they go out into the workforce. There are still students who get certificates of completion. For a student who is nonverbal, who is unable to take that same course path, and they have a more functional, life skill oriented path, those students do receive a certificate of completion, which is still an acknowledgement that you've done the hard work to get through your 12 years of school and then transition as well. But they are not bound for the workforce. A lot of them are in day centers. Some of them will be with their families. Some move into group homes and things of that nature. But the majority of our students that come through our district receive diplomas. And that is also a point of pride here. That's not the case everywhere you go. And school age IEP transitions to 504 plans. This is a little tricky. If you have a student who has a learning disability and they're a high school student getting ready to go off to college or to a junior college, a community college, typically we will take an IEP and we will turn it into a 504 plan. Remember those accommodations we talked about? Now it goes from being an IEP back to being a 504, which they can take to the student assistance center or the learning center on their campus, and they will help them to make sure they get those accommodations in class, because there aren't barriers of our kids going to college. There should not be. They just need a little bit of help. So they can take those accommodations in a 504 plan from their IEP, take it up to the college counselor. Did I talk that fast? That was a lot of information. So we do have a little time for question and answer. And I know that those of you at home, I don't know if you want to put questions, the ladies will read them to me if you put some in the chat. And those of you here in the room, if you have some questions, please feel free.
The question.
Yes.
Who is able to attend the IEP meeting? Like for your child?
On your behalf, or on part of the school?
I guess, and on my behalf, like for my child, like who, I mean, I know the support staff from the school who will be there, but who are you allowed to bring to the IEP meeting, or what staff are allowed or not allowed, or is there anything not allowed in that?
Typically, we would not have anybody in the meeting who's not involved with your child. So we wouldn't have the teacher next door, unless the child goes to that classroom. We would typically have the people that your child is going to see in the course of the school day or the week. So maybe they don't see a speech therapist daily, but if they receive that service, that person should be in the meeting.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? And if it's really specific, again, remember that first slide, so we can talk when we're done, okay? Anybody else have any questions? Anything?
The other thing is the pathways.
Some community work, it's some employment work.
My son Colin is getting out of school now at noon.
Okay, so you said, yeah, half day senior, that happens.
And I was like, no, where do you need to be in there?
Okay,
you
now
know?
we're getting into names and particulars, so I'm gonna
sorry.
pause that one for. a
And
private
then he's
conversation.
like on a half day, I'm out at 10, and I'm like, well,
Okay,
why?
we're gonna pause on that one and we'll talk about that privately, okay? Because that's gonna be site specific and your child specific.
Oh,
Can I share a little bit from what
Absolutely.
we're doing right now? One little thing, so when your child graduates, they'll walk with graduation, they'll receive actually the certificate of attendance. So they'll actually get something also along with everyone else. I also have twins and one is in the program. One not,
Yeah.
My daughter's in Pathways this year and I have to say, I'm so impressed. They refer to it as the office, each other as coworkers, interns, verbiage matters. They're going out to Halo Animal Rescue. They're going to Upper Crust Pizza. They're going to elementary schools. We're working on
Great.
Royal Palms Resort, trying to reel them in. So they've gone to banks, they've gone to Bolero, got the tour from the manager, how to apply. Like, it's really impressive, so they're kind of getting a sampling of different job opportunities, but also reinforcement with the skills. The eye contact, the clear voice and things like that. So it's pretty amazing. And then once they're done with Pathways, then they'll get
he's getting out early.
the diploma. No, mine, sorry, yeah.
We'll talk
We'll
about it.
talk.
Oh.
I do have some.
Thank you. That was very helpful, Deb, because you are living it right now and know exactly what your
This is
child
my
is doing on a
life.
daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah, and I know in theory what it should look like, but like you're giving examples of specific places they go.
Yeah.
So restaurant work, grocery work.
It's a
different kinds of-
variety.
and they have
Elementary
academic
schools.
classes
Oh, yeah,
for a
Yep.
period of the day.
I'm like functional academics.
English, math,
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
We
science,
don't want them to
whatever.
lose those skills because they're going to,
Right.
apply for jobs. You're gonna need to be able to read an application, fill things out. So we don't want them to lose that. And they do mock interviews as well once they've been in the program for a while.
Mhm.
I tend to go in, which is a lot of fun for me. I get to go in and be the person who has a potential job for your child. And so that's a whole lot of fun, doing mock interviews with the kids. So we do all kinds of fun stuff like that with the programs.
I volunteered annually with United Way. I was a mock interviewer down at Metro Tech
Nice,
High
very nice.
School, so every year.
may have volunteered yourself.
Yeah, right.
It's really something
They're
there.
gonna sign you up.
It's optional whether they go, the kids are not,
Sure.
so all the ones who go are the exceptional ones anyway, really, who are really motivated and it's terrific.
Sure.
Yeah, we do have
questions
some
from home?
questions online. Yeah.
Great.
So we have a question about like transition between elementary school and middle school, middle school and high school.
Yep.
What types of supports are provided? Their child's well supported, now in elementary school, but can you
Yep.
talk about how that works and if there's any differences between middle school or, middle school to high school or elementary to middle school?
Great question. And it's very timely because we were just talking about that today.
Mhm.
We used to do in our district, we do a half day where we called it an articulation day. I don't know where that strange word came from, but that's just what we called it. And I was a middle school teacher. So we would meet with the elementary people who were sending kids up to us. And then we would also meet with the high schools that we were sending kids up to, so that we were able to talk about kids that we were going to be receiving and get a real good feel for who's coming, what are their needs, what do we need to prepare? And then we would talk to the high schools, here's who you're going to get, here's who we're sending, here's what you need to prepare. So that was a really great opportunity. Right now, we tend to do that in January, and it tends to be our school psychologists because they can leave their sites. They don't have students in their classroom. They can leave their sites and they come in and they bring a kind of a fact sheet about each student. And as we talk about it, like, I'm thinking about this student going to your program or your site, here's his needs, how is he going to fit with your program? So we do that with like a whole big group of people in a room. We do elementary to middle, and then a different day we do middle to high, so that we're making sure that we're getting good fits for all of the kids. So we talk about each individual and make sure that they're actually, and these are typically exceptional students. Students that have like a mild learning disability in reading, for instance, would go to their home school. That wouldn't even be a conversation. But when we're talking about kids that have more significant disabilities, then we do have these conversations to make sure that they are well supported and that they don't land somewhere where no one knew they were coming and they've got a great amount of need that is not being addressed.
Yeah, we have some more. So, can you describe how we as parents can expect to be guided through what is appropriate for our child? So talking about like, how will IEP meetings work in terms of providing parents like the information they need to know about what's best for their child? And then can you talk about how does the staff evaluate at the end of every school year? For the next school year to see what the plan will be for the next school year. So maybe MET evals versus IEP meetings.
Yep, absolutely. Quarterly, if your child has an IEP, you should receive a quarterly progress report. Our teachers are encouraged, strongly encouraged, to take data on a regular basis, because we don't want to just 9 weeks in, like, okay, now it's time for a quarterly progress report. We need data all along the way. And that data should be driving your instruction as a teacher, so that you are making sure that your child's needs are being met. So that's a big push from our department, is to really make sure that they're having data-driven conversations and that data is used to inform instruction. So each quarter, you should get what looks like your IEP goals, and under each goal, there should be the progress reporting. So you talk about a baseline in your IEP meeting. This is where your child is right now. This is where we want them to be a year from now. But each quarter, you get a progress report. Here was the baseline. Here's how much progress we've made. So under the goals, you'll see the progress. You'll get that 4 times throughout the year. And yes, the IEP is redone each year with hopefully new goals. And we're making strides toward setting that bar higher each time, because that's our goal. We want to close the gap for our students and get them into the general education.
We have a question about the
Did I
type of
capture all the pieces? Because that one had quite a few pieces.
Yeah, I think so.
Think
Just
so.
like how,
Okay.
yeah, how does the parent know?
If not, that person hopefully
Yeah.
will.
Yeah, okay.
Let us
Okay.
know.
If I did, yeah, please, keep it in there then.
Yeah. This is a question about, can you talk about the project search, like interview criteria process? They want to know what type of student would be a best fit for that.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question because we didn't even know. When we first started this,
And can I add to, they're asking specifically, are uh, students of, or high IQ or average, so maybe the
Yeah.
more definition of.
absolutely. I will tell you, when someone brought Project Search to my ears, I'd never heard of it. I had no idea what it was. I kind of resisted. I'm like, oh, that sounds like won't work for me. It's been the best thing we could have done. But I had to get dragged kicking and screaming into it because I didn't know. But it's a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. It's an international program, and we're very fortunate to have been a part of it, or to be a part of it. But one of the things that we talked about is like, how do we determine which students will be selected? And a very wise man from Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota, who'd done this for years and years and years, talked to us about, like, think about it like a stoplight. You have red, yellow, and green. Green students don't need Project Search. They are kids who, when they get out of high school, are going to be able to go and get a job. They don't need Project Search. Then you have red students. No matter how much you support them, they're not meant for the workforce. So some of those kids that we talked about that are going to get a certificate of completion. Those students probably will not be our kids that will be sending to Project Search. But those yellow kids that they haven't been able to get a job without this. They are going to be employable. They're going to be good employees. You're going to be glad to have them, but they need help. Those are the kids that we target. And so in our interview process, we ask some questions that are pretty easy lobs, but we also ask some questions that really make them think. And they have to really, they will show us, what kind of work ethic are they bringing to the table? Do they want to learn? Are they open? Do they really want to work? We've had students in their interview say, I'm here because my mom wants me to do this. I don't really want a job. That's not a Project Search kid for us because we have a partnership with Mayo. We have to show up. It's embarrassing if we send them someone and that person doesn't even want to be there. They don't want to work. They've got poor attendance. They're lazy on the job. That's a bad reflection on us. So we have to hold up our end of things, just like Mayo does. When they first started, they were a little intimidated as well. And they had about 3 or 4 departments that said, yeah, we'll do this. And once those departments saw, wow, this is great. Can we get some of those kids? Now it has spread through Mayo like crazy. So we're in like 13 different departments. Is that right, Deb? 13? 15?
At least.
So it's growing. Each year, another department comes on like, hey, we have interns. So we've only got 12 interns. So maybe they'll expand our numbers. But right now, that's about all we can manage because we have a teacher and 2 job coaches. So 12 is enough to support because they do need adult support still. They're the yellow kids, right? They can't do the job by themselves yet. They need some help.
And we do actually have former interns
Mhm.
that have been hired on, but I always think of.
Yeah.
One in the pharmacy.
Yep.
That's working in the pharmacy.
Our awesome kids.
Right.
And now she's become a mentor for.
Yep.
Another intern.
Which is
So
remarkable.
it's,
Yes,
She's
It's
the one who
amazing.
got up and spoke last.
yes.
yes.
So
Yeah.
we're very proud of our interns that are still working there and, representing our district well. So we have a good reputation with them, so we just keep sending them kids. So
And
it's a
really
beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
project.
influencing the culture at Mayo Clinic too.
Yes,
It's
yes.
pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was impressive to see the people at Mayo get so excited about it.
Maybe we should go for the men.
One project at a time.
Well, just a thought. I mean,
Sure,
it's a
sure.
nice
We've-
place, museum.
We
Yeah,
do have a partnership with them to visit. We're not working there yet.
we
Give it a
do have a
question?
couple more questions. How do
Okay.
you feel on time?
Good.
Good?
I'm good.
Okay. So, if a child has an IEP, does, Paradise Valley Unified School District recommend parents get a private evaluation for autism, ADD, ADHD, et cetera? Or is all of that done with PVUSD at an appropriate juncture? So medical diagnosis versus.
Yeah, we do
Special
not
education
give-
eligibility.
Right. We only can determine educational eligibility. That is what our umbrella or our scope of practice allows, is educational eligibility. Your doctors, you're more than welcome to take your child to a pediatrician for any eligibility that you would like that's a medical eligibility, but we do not make medical eligibilities. We don't make a medical diagnosis. We're not, even our doctoral sites are not that type of doctor. So they don't cite DSM and give you a diagnosis. They actually perform a huge assessment, and based on those results, will give an educational eligibility. So I'm not suggesting that you need to do that. We try to put the educational components in place and determine those eligibilities to help your child be successful in school.
Can a mostly nonverbal child with an AAC device be in a general education classroom, or would they be likely to get a certificate of completion? So if again, can you go through certificate of completion versus diploma?
Yes, and again, that goes back to the I and IEP. That is a bit of information, but I'm lacking a lot, not
Yeah.
knowing who the student is. If the student was doing the same coursework as the other students and completes that same track of education, absolutely, they would get a diploma, because they're doing the 4 years of math, the 4 years of language arts, the science, the social studies. Once they complete that coursework, they're eligible for a diploma. So I don't have quite enough information there to make that determination.
Yeah,
But if
no,
A then B, if they've
Right,
done those
yeah.
courses, yes, they would get a diploma.
Can you talk about middle school study skills class, what that entails?
Yes, reference and study skills is offered at most of our middle schools, and it is taught by a special education teacher. Oftentimes, we offer like language arts and math at the middle school level, but our students may struggle in science, social studies. They may be behind in other areas. So it's an opportunity for them to work on executive functioning, to work on life skills if they need it, to work on social skills if they need it, and then to get support with some of those academic areas that are not necessarily supported through their IEP.
Okay, so then, do you recommend the study skills class for a student with an IEP? Or do you find that it takes away from being able to take an elective in a negative way?
Well, that's the good and the bad, right? If your child needs that time to work with the teacher to reinforce concepts, I would say yes, by all means, because that's what's most important. We want them to be solid on their foundations and their concepts of academics, but they do develop an elective. I don't know how important years of PE are, but to a lot of our kids, that's really important. That's the best part of their day. So sometimes it does mean giving up an elective, and our kids don't like to do that. But sometimes it's really important. That taught reference and study skills as a resource teacher, and I know that my students needed that. They griped about coming in, sure. They griped about not being able to go to the PE field with their buddies because they were doing their favorite sport. But at the end of the day, they were now prepared for that science test they were going to go to. So it's just a matter of, again, the I and IEP. Every individual is different. Some kids need to go get, blow the stink off and run around outside. So it just depends on your child.
If a child qualifies for CD or LAS, how does that work? Are they still in their like main classroom and they get pulled out of the class, or are they in a class all day dedicated to the classification?
They're in a class all day dedicated to that classification, unless, of course, they have an area of strength. If they've got a really strong area, we encourage the teams to send them out to the gen ed for that classroom or for that subject, because that's an area where they can start broaching outside of that classroom, because after third grade, they're out. So if they have an area of strength, we would want them to be out for that. Otherwise, it's kind of a self-contained setting.
And we have one more question.
Sure.
Are you okay?
Nope,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, it says, do people, I'm assuming this means do students.
Let's go, Betty.
Repeat grades still, or work with the resource teachers to stay in their current class? Is that a question that's too individualized?
Typically, we do not encourage retention in special education. There's not a lot of studies out there that really say that there's a lot of benefit to retention. And in my experience, with our students that are transition bound, they lose a year of that transition if they spend another year in elementary school. We have a lot of parents who want to keep their kids like in elementary school. I want to keep them in kindergarten one more year. Excuse me, which is great if they're going to be a football player and they're going to be a redshirt. But otherwise, it's not the best option for our kids who are going to go into transition, because they lose 1 year of eligibility there. And those years are really important. So it's again, a very individualized type of a question. We as IEP teams do not discuss retention at all. That's something that typically is between your administrator and your classroom teacher.
Thank you. All right. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here this evening and online. Thank you, of course,
Of
to
course,
Ms.
thank you.
Taylor
Thank
for
you.
all of the information and taking so many questions at the end. We really appreciate you giving us access to the information. So thank you all.
Thank you,
and have a
everybody.
good evening.
Have a wonderful. I just-